Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to another segment of Lean Focus webinar series. This month's topic is entitled Innovation Transformation, the 10-element model to drive sustainable revenue growth. It's a mouthful, but I know you're going to be interested in the topic. It'll be my pleasure here in a moment to introduce you to our speaker, George Ellis, who leads our innovation practice, who will talk more about this topic and go into detail about our approach. Next. Just a reminder that this information is the confidential proprietary information of Lean Focus, and we ask that you not use it outside of the construct of this presentation. And if you need permission to use any materials, please reach out to us and we can communicate with you as to how to go about that. Next. So some logistics and some housekeeping before we get started into the webinar. The participants on the call will be placed in listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity at the end of the webinar with roughly 10 to 15 minutes remaining to pose your questions, and we will answer those questions as time allots. There are some handouts available for this presentation. If you look in the GoToWebinar control panel in your screen, there should be a handouts 4 of 5. There are 4 particular handouts related to this topic. One is the innovation assessment, which George will talk about later on in the presentation, which outlines what that process looks like. There's also a helpful Excel-based tool for you to assess your own innovation organization inside of your company to see where you are against best practice, and we'll talk about what that looks like in the webinar. There's an overview on Lean Focus Consulting as a practice, and then a separate handout which is related to the practice that George leads, which is the innovation practice inside of Lean Focus, which is the subject matter for today's webinar. If you have a question, we ask that you enter the question into the questions chat box. I will be acting as the moderator for those questions, and when we get to the Q&A section of today's webinar, I'll be reading those questions aloud to George, and he will be answering those questions as long as time allows. And for those of you that were unable to attend today's session live, everyone, including those who are unable to participate live, will receive an email, which usually comes a day later after the webinar concludes, which includes a recording of this webinar. You may want to check your spam folder and make sure that it did not go to spam. Some firewalls and companies create that problem for you. And additionally to that, if you do not receive the email or you want to access this webinar or any webinar that Lean Focus has done in the past, you can always go to our website on the Thought Leadership tab and peruse and scroll through the webinars that we've conducted in the past. We'll talk more about that as well later on in the presentation. Next. So today's agenda for the webinar topic is as follows. I will kick it off with a brief introduction as to who we are at Lean Focus and what we do. Then George will talk about the content with relation to the topic at hand. He's going to go into the types of problems that exist in the innovation function inside of companies. What solutions can we pull on to deal with those problems? Then we'll cover a client case study and how we reimagined and redesigned a new product development process inside of one of Lean Focus's clients. Then give you some helpful next steps that you can take, which will be inclusive of the self-assessment that we've already referred to, as well as some ongoing resources and support that you can leverage from us. And then we will conclude with your questions. Again, what questions you have, please submit those in the chat box, and I will moderate those questions at the end of today's session. Next. Okay, so now we're going to get into a brief introduction of Lean Focus. Next. So Lean Focus is a management consultancy that specializes in partnering with our clients to build high performance cultures via an implementation of a business system approach to drive continuous improvement. And that has three critical components to its success. It starts with leadership, which we refer to as driven leaders who have the proper mindsets, exhibit the proper behaviors, and take action in congruency along these lean business system principles. Then guiding principles are the ways of working inside of a company that need to change in order to exhibit the behaviors that are aligned with this lean business system approach. And lastly are the tools and systems themselves that are available for employees to leverage to solve problems in their organization to help those companies realize the performance that they aspire to achieve. And a big piece of what we're going to talk about today is the innovation subsystem that exists inside of the lean focused business system, which is just one example of the systems that I'm referring to here on this page. All of this should lead to a company that's able to demonstrate sustained profitable growth, which is the outcome that we all desire. Next. Just a cross-section and sampling of some of the clients and industries that we've worked with in a similar fashion to what we're laying out here in this webinar. As you can see, the industries are rather diverse. The models that these companies embrace are also just as diverse. And the main takeaway here is that lean applies regardless of industry, regardless of size of business, regardless of the type of business, and whether or not you embrace manufacturing or whether or not you sell services or software. Lean thinking applies, waste can be eliminated, value creation can be realized. And all of this is accomplished, again, through unlocking your people to create this high performance culture. Next. So I mentioned the system-based approach, which is one of the three legs of the high performance culture. This is what we refer to as our lean focus business system, which is a comprehensive toolbox that aims to help a business achieve sustained profitable growth. And if you'll notice, there's a subsystem called growth, of which George Ellis's presentation is focused on primarily, at least the innovation aspects of that growth model. So in functions in a business, you can think of the functions as product management, R&D, project management, portfolio management, the parts of the organization that would be responsible for the innovation engine. That will be the topic of today's webinar. We will not get into the commercial execution of those growth tools in terms of sales and marketing. So the imaginary cutoff, if you will, would be launching a product and then the sales organization and marketing organization marketing that product and selling that product to our markets that we serve. Additionally, there's a lean system, which is aimed at the operational continuous improvement. So you think of traditional safety, quality, delivery, and cost that improve the four walls of a factory. And then all the cultural tools needed that we have to bring to bear in order to change the culture and the people in the organization in order to make it all go. And then, of course, at the foundation are the bedrock principles of how we work. These are the guiding principles, which was leg 2 of the pillar of a high performance culture. And then in the middle are the foundational tools that are function agnostic, meaning regarding no matter where you work in the business, these tools apply as a way to help drive value creation across the business. So when you pull it all together, now you have a sustainable system by which to achieve and unlock sustained profitable growth inside of a business. Next. So it's now my distinct pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, who will go over his background and a bio, and we'll start off the agenda with the topic, innovation, defining the problems. George?
Yeah, well, thanks, Damon. I appreciate you getting us started. I've spent almost all of my career in R&D, first as an engineer in development, and then as a single contributor, and finally moving into leadership in R&D. And so I've been about 35 years doing that, and I had an opportunity at Danaher to move into the Danaher Business System Office a few years ago, and I really fell in love with lean and lean thinking as it applies to innovation. And so there are a lot of parallels to where lean thinking is used in other places, but there's also a lot of differences, and so it's a very satisfying place to work. For me, the excitement of it is that, you know, every R&D team I've met is just have a lot of very talented people. They spend decades learning their craft, and they get tripped up in hidden waste. And so it's a real joy to work with folks to, and the whole point that we try to do is cut the waste so that the real ability of those technical people can show through. And as the technical people, also the people who are great product managers and all the people in innovation who, they're very good. They're very good at what they do. They're talented. And what's been such a joy for me in joining Lean Focus is this is just all I do now, is think about this topic. And anyway, it's been a good 8 or 12 weeks so far, and looking forward to the future. And let's talk a minute about like what is the problem that we're trying to address? What's the burning platform? So we're here to really talk about the full, we call it value stream of innovation. You know, the beginning of the value stream is finding that unmet need that's valuable to customers that you're able to serve. And if you think about that stream, you move all the way through to ideating projects, to picking some subset of those, defining them, and then doing the hard work of project management, which is where the money's really spent up here in the design section, and then you deploy them. And that deployment, that takes a year or two to really get a product out and stable. So that whole journey of innovation, that in a lot of companies, that might be 5 or 7 years from the very beginning to where the product is launched and doing well. And every one of these stages are important to be done well if we're going to deliver growth. So you can see that's of course that's what our first goal is to deliver growth to the organization. Innovation is an expensive part of the business, and it's an investment to create growth. How do we create growth? We create value. You know, being a longtime R&D, a long time in R&D, I can remember a lot of the feelings of we would design amazing products, but customers wouldn't buy them, and we would think about how innovative they were. But you know, customers are willing to pay for value. When you do those kinds of projects that don't do well, there's something wrong in the value you're offering, because if you take the right customers the value, they will purchase it. And so, you know, one of the first things we look at is in successful innovation is, are you able to generate revenue with the products? If you're not, there's you know, that's an indication of a systemic problem. When we look into a couple of parts that are very important in execution, so think about delivering projects. A lot of companies are tripped up here. So we have a project team, we have amazing people, but you know, you're trying to get 15, 20, 25 people to cooperate in something quite complex. And it doesn't take many mistakes for it not to work. And so if we can't get those projects out on time, it doesn't matter how innovative or interesting the ideas are, they're not going to generate much value for the customer. And then I want to mention here, this is a part that as an R&D person, I really had to learn this over the years. You have to have success takes a great launch. You know, just having a product and putting it out there, it's not enough. And so how do you get that product launched? You know, one of the experiences I've had several times in this area is a product will go out, it won't do well, and the team is like, well, we know what's wrong, it's a bad product, we're going to go do another one. Let's go start again. But in fact, when we go work on the launch and problem solve the launch, we find out there were things we could do to take that product and make it successful just as it was. I would say roughly my experiences when I've seen failures, about half of the revenue disappointment is actually in the launch itself, getting materials out, being ready for the different regions, and when the product in a lot of cases certainly met a lot of needs. Last thing we want to point out in the platform is senior leadership is critical. You know, if you're a senior leader, you have so much value to offer to the team that you might be missing. You know, do you have a clear strategy so they have a set of goals and they know what they're marching towards? Or are they just supposed to do the best they can? You know, do you have a stable portfolio? Are you able to make decisions quickly? And are you able to share insights? Are you able to look at projects and help teams? Remember, as a senior leader, you have a lot of acumen and experience that doesn't exist anywhere else in that project team. And so we want to leverage that to give teams every opportunity to be successful. The point here we want to say is that, you know, lean thinking is used in every step of innovation, and you'll see that as we move on. What's the current state? Well, the current state, so we have here's a reference from McKinsey that 86% of executives said that innovation was in their top priorities, and yet a tenth of them were satisfied with what happened, with what they got. And look at the range of issues that they flagged. We do well. About half the people said that we do well on a few good ideas, but we just don't have much of a pipeline. And half didn't agree with that. Another question was, we can do pockets. Occasionally we can do innovation successfully, but we can't scale it. And the third one, we have lots of good ideas, but we can't get them through to commercialization. That relates to what I was just saying a moment ago. There's a lot of skill to successfully commercializing an idea. And as you can see here, half the executives feel like they really don't do it that well. And we have a few good ideas, we don't commercialize them well, and then we have the right, and then this is really an interesting one to me. A third of folks felt like they have the right balance between the good ideas and the effective commercialization. So these are all places where if you think about that value stream, there's opportunity to interrupt the stream of value. Think of the value stream as, from the beginning of that good idea, like I said, in the end, at every step, the value is increasing of what you're doing. You're adding value as you define the project, execute the project, launch the project. Any part of that value stream that gets interrupted affects it affects the total delivery of value from innovation. Now, when we say innovation, I wanted to just take the slide so that we all got on the same page. What do we mean by that? So at Lean Focus, we divide innovation into 4 areas. There's Aspire, where we're really trying to create the right projects. So when you're in Aspire, the projects aren't defined yet. This is where they're being defined. And so, in Aspire, we're going to have a lot of ideas. We're only going to pick a handful of them and move them forward. Now, as we move them into the pipeline, now these are defined ideas, and we're going to move them through a project pipeline. We want to refine the value. We want to understand how customers are going to use the product and what value it brings to them. And this last point, we want to make sure we have a well-defined project. Because a well-defined project is your #1 way to battle scope creep, which is a huge problem. And when people say scope creep in a project, that happens in the design phase where you're actually working on it. I'm not crazy about the word creep. I mean, I like the term, but it makes it sound like it's a 5%, 10%. You can see scope creep of 2 and 3 times. Projects just get massive as you get partway through. You did something wrong. You almost have to start over. And projects can go years over, and so that meticulous definition is certainly it's a critical step as we move into design. Then we've got to move our projects through stage gates so that we're delivering value. I mean, think about that value stream again. If you have a stage gate or a phase gate system, at each phase, as you graduate through, the product has higher and higher value to the organization. It's getting closer to being launched. We've got to do, there's the hard work of just project management, and there's, and then how are we tracking the customer and their views of what we're doing as the project goes on? So many companies define the project at the beginning, freeze it, and then develop the project, and maybe 12, 14 months later, deliver a product, which means they stop listening to the market. In terms of the project, they almost cover their ears for a year, and then we go introduce it to the customer versus working with the customer continuously, showing them, taking what we do, putting it in the field in whatever form we can. And I'm not talking about 80% of the way through at an alpha unit. I mean, like right in the beginning, we're taking units out and getting that feedback, knowing we're solving valuable problems. And then there's deploy. How do we launch it to all the regions? I think there's a myth of the global product launch. Very few products are launched globally. They're really launched one region at a time. And how do we, sometimes the steam kind of comes out of the machine as we're going to regions 2 and 3. How are we tracking the customer experience so we're able to very rapidly come and correct and improve the customer experience as we go versus waiting 6 months and seeing the product isn't selling well and then addressing it? How are we finding and solving, how are we doing real problem solving on the launch so that we understand, what is it? Launches are affected by all sorts of things, quality or delivery and manufacturing. It might be bugs in software, but it also could be delivering the right material to support the product. It could be the technical team. There's so many things that have to go right for a product to be successful globally. How are we finding those, and then how are we applying good lean thinking to problem solving? Because that's what will get us to financial success. So that's the journey of innovation in a little more detail. Now, here we want to shift to talking about what are some of the problems that people feel in innovation. So if you're an R&D developer, if you're a product manager, if you're a senior leader or a salesperson, how do you view the issues in innovation in your organization? Well, let's just take a quick stop here and talk about the difference, how we treat symptoms, problems, and root causes. So symptoms are things we feel. So you see here in this example, I feel tired. You know you feel tired. No one can tell you you don't feel tired. No one can tell you you don't have a headache. They're subjective, but they're obvious to you. The problem that we want to get to is it's a measurable problem that we can address. And so you can see here, the fever is something that we can take. We can take your temperature, we can measure a fever, and then we have something, like I said, we have something measurable. And then finally, we look at root causes. Now, when people talk about problems in innovation, the reason we show you this little picture is you really need to understand when you're talking, which of those three are you talking about? Because most people will just mix them. And so all of these are valid, but we also want to understand which one we're talking about. So let's go through a few examples. So what we did here was we looked at each of the four stages, and there's not time to go through this in detail, but we can go through a couple and see if any of these resonates with you. So for example, in the Aspire, where we're trying to get that flow of great ideas so that we're able to go find a handful of products that really delight a customer. So that's that first part. Here's some symptoms, this feeling that we just take on too much, or we just don't really protect our intellectual property. We just don't do enough. I hope you get the sense how these feel. These are feelings. We don't have the vision. Our new products are just version 3.4. Last year was version 3.3. We focus too much on the customers we have now. I was just talking with somebody about something like that yesterday. Have an organization just has a few customers. Are we looking at all the customers so we understand where the whole market is going? Or are we looking at the two or three that we have that we're most successful with? And technology, we limit ourselves to what we know. So these are some feelings you might have about how you're developing your funnel. What's the problem? Disappointing growth from new products. So maybe your organization, you want to see 5% per year revenue growth out of new products, and maybe you're seeing 0. And so that would be a measurable problem. And then let's look at let's just take one of these root causes. We don't have a structural means to build a product and technology roadmap. So what happens to us is, all of our ideas seem to come from a handful of people. We all get together and talk about it, but there's not a structured way to really look at the whole roadmap and compare alternatives. So that would be a root cause we could attack. So that's an example of one. Maybe I'll just grab one more here. We just don't know how to segment markets. We have good ideas. We think they apply to people, but how do we go and actually look at the size of the market that this appeals to and how much they're likely to spend on it? So, we don't have means to segment. And so these are the kinds of root causes we can address that will help us improve the measurement. So I'm going to go on to the next phase, discover. So this is that part where, we're really trying to, we've got an idea, we know this is the direction we want to go, but how do we refine it so that when this project gets started, we have high confidence it's going to be successful? Well, what are some feelings people have? We look too much at specs. We don't go see what the user needs. We just have a spec. Last year we said our error rate was 2%. This year it should be 1.5%, because that's really important. Versus going and seeing the customer and understanding, how do they use the product and where do they run into problems, and feeling their pain points. Or when we capture customer feedback, it's haphazard. I can remember times where we would go talk about customer feedback, and it was really all in one guy's head. And the person would talk in the meeting about, this is what the market feels. I'm like, that just doesn't seem very systematic. It's really hard for one person to understand at that level. And it didn't feel right. Or we discover sneak-in projects after promises are made. Oh my goodness, this one can be so frustrating. Where we have a full, our R&D group is developing, they have a full plate, and then somebody made a commitment to a customer that we have to fulfill that we really didn't check on at all, but by the time we actually take it through our process, the customer's already expecting it, and it's going to be a real heartbreak if we tell them no. And so we have to do it, and it causes chaos. These are feelings that people might have. And what's the problem? The problem is the portfolio is either out of date or has errors or is confusing. We don't manage the portfolio well. What would a root cause of that be? We don't have a standard in our organization that defines comprehensive project requirements. And this is what you have to have if you're going to bring a project into development. Or here's another root cause. We don't have a tool to really get our teams working collaboratively. A lot of really smart people on the team, but they don't really talk to each other that well. We don't have customer-facing associates coming in and meeting with the team. We aren't really taking advantage of the entire team and bringing out the wisdom of the full team as we develop the product. And let me just pick out one more. We don't have a process to collect and analyze customer feedback. It's kind of similar to what we were talking about a moment ago in Aspire. It's a similar problem in Discover, but just really applied to the one project. How am I really understanding what 10 customers think versus that one customer that was just really nice and spent a lot of time with us, and that person and that one customer represents their view, but we don't know how representative is, because we don't have a structured way to do it. These are all root causes we can address. As I look through design, now this is where the real money of R&D is spent. So most R&D departments, when you're doing, at least on the new product part of what you're doing, 80% of your money is spent right here. It's the heavy lift. What are some feelings? I don't know what all these people are doing. I can't tell you how many business leaders I've had say that to me. What are all these people? What do they do? That's a feeling. We have too many people who are leaving. They're not engaged. I don't understand that. Or we get too many surprises. This is a favorite. The project was fine last month. It was fine the month before. This month it slipped 3 months. It's just too many surprises. It doesn't feel right. And maybe the development team doesn't. There's a feeling that they're not really fighting to hold their commitments. They made some commitments early on. Some things changed as they usually do. But where's the fight to keep the project moving on time despite some unexpected events? So those are some of the kinds of symptoms that you might feel in the design part of the innovation journey. And what's the measurable problem? Well, this one is a pretty standard across the industry. Are my projects done on time to spec? So that's at the beginning of the project, we kick it off, we put in, maybe you're putting in 500,000, maybe you're putting in 5 million, but when you start the project, there's an end date. How often do we hit that end date? Well, a lot of companies, it's well under half, under a quarter. What are some of the root causes to that we can address? We can address the failure to validate the value proposition throughout the development. We all think we have an idea. We all think we understand the product on day one, but a year later, you've learned a lot. Are you going back to that customer? Like we talked about earlier. I have ambiguous prioritization. I can think of years in R&D where, this month it was this project. The next month, whatever a customer called in, that became the hot project. Don't worry about the first project. And the next month, another project, or do we have, or maybe it's just ambiguous. Every project is really important and they all have to be done. And so if you're down in managing development teams, how do you make decisions as you run into barriers, or if you run into resource issues? Here's another one of my favorites. We just don't have workflows or tools that daily manage. So we have these really complicated project plan, but the project plans in the project manager's head mostly. They have a Gantt chart that's 800 lines long. They seem to be the only ones that really understand it. And then when we come back to the and then when we have a problem, it's very difficult to go back to the team and say, we got to make this up, because people don't understand. They don't, we haven't been daily managing it, and we're getting a lot of surprises. Another favorite is systemic oversubscription of bottleneck resources. Month after month, we tell people to do 150% of what they can do. That's a real problem, because people can't do 150% of a load. They can't do it for long. I mean, most people will jump in and do that if there's a If there's a real problem that has to be addressed over a short term, but when it's systemic, it doesn't work. And then, what project moves forward? You're not really managing the process if you're allowing that to happen. Again, all of these are root causes that we can address. And then finally, let's move on to the last section, which is deployment. What are some feelings you might have? The new products, they disappoint customers, and it's really confusing the first 6 months. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Or, the promises for growth revenue at the start of a project evaporate, and the entire project turns into cannibalization. All we do is go replace the last version of the product that we had, and we're not growing. And so, what's the problem? Revenue attainment. We said we were going to make X, and we made much less than X. And like I said, especially if we limit it to growth, and focus on growth more than cannibalization, the growth numbers can be quite disappointing. And what are some root causes to that? Well, we don't have a process. We don't have a process to plan the resources to give us a predictable launch. That's a famous one. Launch the product, the whole team goes over to the next project, and who's left to deal with the inevitable issues that follow? In the interest of time, I'll keep moving, but I hope you get the idea, and I hope at least these symptoms resonate with you. They're common problems in innovation. If we look at all of these root causes, there's a lot, right? Depending on where you are, your organization, there's a lot of root causes. And so how do we deal with the fact that there are so many? Now, I want to say here for a moment, in a few slides, we're going to talk about, hey, we have a problem, we know what it is right now, and we can help you with that too. But most of this talk is about how do I look at the entire value stream, and how do I make the decision? Because you can see there's a lot of opportunities there to fix. How do I pick the right one? So let's talk about some solutions now. So I want to give you a few minutes to take this slide in, but this is our view of the entire innovation journey of the tools that we provide to support it. So as you can see, again, we're divided into our 4 sections, and up across the top is the management section. How do we manage these things? And then down at the bottom is how do we actually create value? So in the beginning, as I said before, we have to segment, we have an innovation engine, and we push through a funnel and we get the projects that we're going to work on. When we go into discover, we've got to understand, what's the user workflow? That's so critical. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that we will go make a product because we think the doctor wants this sample process 20% faster. And what we really find out is that 1 in 6 of the processing fails and the doctor has to start over, or the lab has to start the sample over. And they're not so concerned with moving all of them, it's getting the quality defects down. Well, if you're not with the doctor or with the lab, how are you going to know which is really troubling? Because either could be the problem. We move from there into design thinking, where we pull the whole team together and collaborate, so that we're pulling the full innovative potential out of our teams. And then we move into project requirements Kaizen, where we address the problems of getting the project meticulously defined. As we move into there, we sign the contract, we have a project, and we have a lot of parallel tools that run in process. We're doing lean product development, which is really your phase gate system. We've got design for manufacturability. We've got to be able to tear down, do value engineering and tear down so we understand the products on the market. We've got visual project management, so we're able to get our projects in on time. We're interfacing with the customer base continuously, and we're ensuring that we're ready for launch. These are all tools that run in parallel during the development. Finally, we launch the product. We go into a launch room Obeya, where essentially we're tracking and problem solving our success at the launch. So that's the entire stream that we support and the tools that we provide for it. And each one of those tools, I should mention here, each one of these tools take on those different root causes. So as you can see, if you take a look, at it, and then when there's a little more time, you can look at it, and if you go back and look at those slides, you can see where each of those root causes is addressed in these different tools. So how do we start? How do we look amongst all of those root causes and decide which one are we going to work on? Because there's nothing more expensive than solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved. And you might have a gut feeling that our problem is in one area, but if we go look at the value stream and take a careful look at it with you, we might find it's in a completely different place. And this is a lean principle that applies in all parts of your business, not just in innovation. So what we want to do is take your performance as we know it today. So let's just write down what we know. So we'll ask you, we would ask you a lot of questions in terms of, how are you assigning people? How are your metrics doing? What metrics you keep? And then we also want to add to that a more subjective look at 10 areas of transformation. So you can see as we look about this list, we've really got we believe a comprehensive listing of the different lenses that we want to look at as we see the opportunity to transform. So it goes all the way from the people on the team. How are we doing design for manufacturability? How are we transferring business innovation, business strategy down to the innovation strategy? You see all the pieces here that were in that journey. When we do an assessment, a typical assessment takes about a week. And the way it works is we take today's performance, we spend a couple of days working with you through interviews, through almost focus groups at the company. You could almost think of them as focus groups within the company. And we go through these and we make a determination together. What are the areas that we want to address first? And from that, we create a first cycle of improvement. So I wanted to show, just as a typical, it turns out different in every company, but maybe we come to a company and say, the first thing we need is product portfolio management. We need a management team that's looking at what we're doing, that's deciding on priorities. That's what we're missing. The next thing is we've got to get visual project management installed because we've got to get projects on time. We know that's an issue, and so on. And so you see the idea is we will pick out of those tools. And here you can see we'll sort of schedule things out for maybe the first 6 months, and we'll look at that as our first cycle of improvement. And when I go back to our the full set of tools, we'll pick the ones that make the most difference at your organization. So I like to use an analogy here of a doctor, right? I want my doctor to know the whole body, everything that's going on. I want my doctor to understand headaches, and I want when my knee hurts, and either be able to say he can mend it or send me to a specialist. But I don't want my doctor to do all of the things at once, right? I want my doctor to do a physical exam, to look at where I am in my health, and pick the things that I need. And that's exactly what we do in the innovation assessment. And now at the same time, during that same week, we're also going to look at a vision for the future. Where are we moving over the next 24 months? In the beginning of the journey, we'll be looking a lot more at the right-hand side of the journey. What are the products we have out there, we've already deployed, and we can go improve that and derive value almost immediately. What are the products that I have that are in development? I really need to get them out. And then, so typically what you'll see is you'll see more emphasis on the right-hand side of the journey. And then as time goes on, we work more and more on the left-hand side of the journey. That's also a typical thing in lean thinking. So I want to do a case study here, and I just love this case study. This is a case study with Pampered Chef. And we were able to work with them, starting with an assessment. And we looked at the organizational, the first thing we did was we looked at the organization to see how it fit. We redesigned it. We right-sized the R&D team for what the organization's needs were. And then we deployed it enterprise-wide. We deployed development policies and processes across the enterprise, creating standard daily management. And when we say daily management, I know that's a moniker for regular cadence meetings. In innovation, it's usually once a week. Its roots are really on the factory floor, and so it maintains that name, daily management. Although I will say, in our most critical R&D projects, we do go into actually having the team meet for 15 minutes each day. If we've got a big team and we've got a really tight goal coming, so occasionally we'll use daily, but in R&D and in innovation in general, it's usually weekly. We created KPIs and we created launch playbooks, and the results are just, they're just great results. So the top line growth almost tripled in 3 years. And you can also see it wasn't just more products, but it was also different types of products, including a subscription service, a new subscription service that it's, as those of you that have tried to move from one type of product to the other, it is challenging. And the expectation is that they're going to continue growing at that rate for years. The methods we use were good, solid, lean methods. Let's start by mapping the process as it is today. Then let's look at what we need in the future state. Now let's build a plan to get there. Now let's build a way to measure how we got there, how we're going to get there. Now let's daily manage that plan and problem solve to keep ourselves on track. So if you're, what are next steps for you? You're watching this, you're saying, wow, there's a lot of things I could look at. What do I do? So the first thing I want to say is, and this is the point I mentioned about 15 minutes ago, you have two choices really. Do you have a known pain point? That would be a little bit like going to the doctor and your knee hurts and the doctor says, well, let's do a complete physical exam. It's like, okay, doctor, my knee hurts right now. Can we please treat that? I'll come back in a few weeks and we can do the physical exam. So that's, if you have issues in innovation that you want to address, you can be in either one of these camps. If you have too many late projects, if you have, I remember this example very well, where we had a project issue that basically, because of the project, we weren't going to respond to the FDA on time. And those of you that deal with the FDA know that is no fun. And so, they were just, they don't want to hear about the whole innovation journey. You just got to get these 4 projects in on time, which we're able to do through visual project management. And we got the FDA their response, and it turned out to be a happy story. Or we have a flagship product that has to go out now. I know it. What are we going to do about it? So if you have known pain points, we can help you with those. If we know the pain point, we can work with you. We'll pick the right tool, and we can get started right away. On the other hand, if you're not sure, if it's a lot of problems and you're not sure where to look, then the thing to think about is look across the entire value stream. Now, if you want to get started, this is a simplified form, and I know it's hard to read, it's not meant to be readable, but just to show you the level of detail, if you want to do your own assessment and just see where you are, these are our 10 points. They're the same ones that I showed you a few moments ago, and we can go look. And you can do a self-evaluation on where you are right now to get a start. The next
George,
step.
real quick, George, on that one. So if you go back one slide.
Sure.
This is one of the handouts. So you can download this Excel document and you can do this with your teams to see where you are versus best in class.
Yeah, it's a great first step. It gets you thinking this way, and I would recommend this to anybody that wants to go down this path. Do the self-assessment. I think it's clarifying. I think now, if you want to go further, what's the next step? And I think Damon would want me to point out, this is another handout you can download, but this is our 1-week assessment that I was telling you about a moment ago. So here's a little 1-page overview of it. And you can see our 3 goals here at the top. We're going to be looking to develop products that delight your customers. We want to get projects on time, on budget, and to spec, and we want to drive business performance with sustained growth. Those are 3 dimensions we think in. Here's a detailed schedule of what we do over the days, and a little bit more information. Take a look at this, and if you'd like to discuss that, we'd certainly like to discuss it with you. The thing I want to say is real results. This generates real results. And I said to you guys earlier, right at the beginning, I said, one of the things I love about lean thinking for innovation is watching people that were so talented and that talent was hidden, or was covered up by hidden waste. And they weren't able to communicate together. They weren't, every time they did a process, they were reinventing the way to do it. Things got left out, starting over, all of that waste. And I told you, I said, I watch people get more engaged. And that, to me, personally, that's the one I find most satisfying. However, as a business, the one I want to talk to you about, the one that I want you to think about, what you're probably thinking about the most is, do I get growth that meets the strategic targets? And so, I can tell you one of the organizations I remember entering with, just as an example, we measured how much revenue we attained. And we went from, I don't know, I would say in the under 50 to over 100%, not much over, 102%. But our products, when we promised revenue at the beginning of the project, the first year we delivered on average 102%. That was That was the bombs and the great projects mixed together, but we were able to deliver the targets to the overall targets of the organization. On-time delivery of projects, I've watched them again and again go from, I would say most organizations who don't manage this are sort of in the low 30s, and we will get to near 100. Now I read Don Reinertson a lot, if you know him, and he recommends you don't really want to quite get to 100 because that shows that you're not taking real high risk, but 85% we hit year after year. Same group of people, by the way, same group of people, different process, different tools, different mindset, problem solving, visual management, but essentially the same teams drove those different results. Hitting the revenue on the project commitments, and then creating innovative products. I remember one product we did, we sold a product in a hardware store, and we sent our team to go use the product in the store, and they put on the jacket of the company, and working with customers, really understanding what customers needed. It was so interesting how much we learned. We got out of the spec sheet. Oh, I need to get accurate on, that's a typical thing. People will say, oh, I need to get this percentage. Every year we get it better and better. We got to get it better. And in the meantime, the customer's got a whole use case you're not doing. How do you know that if you're not intimate with the customer? And then this is the last one that I've already talked about this a lot, getting engagement scores up. So I've watched engagement scores go up, but my favorite one is watching the voluntary severances. In one case, I remember we were seeing 7-8% of our team leave each year, and after 3 years we were down to 2%. You're building a lot of long-term value when you're able to hold on to that talented staff for those years. It's also very satisfying. I love the idea of sending the team home winners, and with successful products. There's just something very satisfying about it. It's when I think about innovation in my journey, that's always where I start. We have, let's see. So Damon, at this point, I think we're here to talk about some other webinars that you might want to take a look at. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say there.
Sure. So I mentioned at the beginning of the call that if you are interested in getting a recording, either from this webinar or past webinars we've done in the past, or enroll in upcoming webinars, you can see the schedule here, and previous webinars are all archived on this part of our site, which is the Thought Leadership tab that you click on when you go to leanfocus.com. And that's all I'll say about that, George. Want to go to the next?
And then I want to give you guys one closing thought, and this is James Womack. He's just one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you know him, but he's one of that original group that brought lean thinking from Toyota to the United States. He's just got a lot of wisdom, this is some advice that he gave to Harley Davidson, and it's don't try to bring lean manufacturing directly into product development. I remember one of my first experiences, I went on an engagement, and the first thing the engineering manager says to me was, the last time we had someone tell us about lean, they drew a spaghetti diagram around the Xerox machine because they wanted to minimize the time people were spending making copies. And that's exactly what Womack is talking about here. So, as he said, lean in product development and manufacturing, they have the same principles, the same respect for the individual, the same experimentation mindset of, I think this, but I'm not sure. I'm going to be humble enough to measure myself, and I'm going to come back and we're going to figure it out. All of that is just good, solid, lean thinking. We're going to standardize so we do things the same way each time. Now, those principles are identical on the factory floor, in the sales office, in innovation, in finance. They're exactly the same. But when you go to apply them, they're very different. So as Womack says, be leery of people who just bring tools directly from the factory floor into innovation. They are quite different. And with that, let me just pause for a few minutes and see if there are any questions.
Great, thanks, George. So as you've been presenting, the questions have been coming in. So I will read a few of these questions. And if you want to ask some more questions, again, the reminder is to type those into the question chat box, and we'll try to get to yours, assuming we have enough time available here. So, George, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, question one. How do you respond to people who say the following? Lean cannot be applied to innovation because it's a quote unquote creative process.
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you think about it, that's really wrapped up in James Womack's quote just a moment ago. It is true that there is a lot of, and I think in the, a lot of what writing is done on this about the difference between tacit and explicit knowledge. When I go on the factory floor, one of the things I'm doing on the factory floor is I'm trying to minimize the tacit knowledge, the hidden knowledge, as much as I can and get everything explicit. Now, when I go into innovation, I'm not doing that. In innovation, we appreciate the tacit knowledge that our experts have. That I may have an engineer that's just fantastic in optical design. Well, I don't want to limit that in any way. So when we get what we do in lean thinking for the innovation, so much of what we're doing is taking the simple things, the minutia. How do I get something approved? How do I have a daily management meeting so we attack problems? How do I ensure that my project is defined well enough? I mean, these are minutia that if you don't manage them, they expand and they actually crowd out the time for the creative thinking, because you're constantly tripped up trying to handle the process issues. So what we're doing is minimizing the time that people spend in things that can be standardized, so that we can maximize the time that our big-brained R&D and product management people, they can be applying that to delighting customers. So it's different from the factory floor, but there's a huge opportunity for improvement in those step-by-step parts of innovation.
Great, thanks. George, the next question here is, when will you know that you've fully implemented an end-to-end innovation process within the company?
Yeah, now this is a hard question, because the answer is really never. Because in the lean journey, we are always improving. We're always getting better. So you're never done. This year, you take the sections that are limiting you in providing value to your customers. You improve those. Next year, you're going to go find the next, and next year, the next. And one of the premises of lean thinking is that the majority of what we do actually goes into waste. And so if you think about it, we always have opportunities to take waste out. Most lean consultants quantify waste at about 85% of what we do. We could do so much more if we did it perfectly. Well, we're never going to get perfect, but we're always getting better. So instead of asking the question, when are we done? I would think of it more as like investing for your retirement. Your whole career, you're not done doing that. But every time you make an investment, there's a payback. And that's how we look at lean. We go address that problem that is limiting your organization today. We go invest in it. We go improve it. We drive more value, happier customers, more revenue, and more growth in the future. And we were able to take those gains and reinvest them the next year. And that cycle never ends. We always have opportunity for more investment, more improvement.
Yeah, so it sounds like my takeaway in that is always prioritizing what's next in perfecting your craft and going back to like, what's the biggest problem that needs to be solved now based on where we are in that maturity, and just staying focused on the next thing.
Yeah, that's Eli Goldrat's bottleneck principle. There's 100 good things to do, but there's only one that's going to move the needle the max. And we got to find that one, because if we're not careful, we'll be solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved. That's expensive.
George, here's another question. It's a service related question. So how does innovation transformation look like in a service-based company versus a manufacturing company? And are there key areas service companies should focus on first?
I think that's a really good question. And I think there's really almost a continuum, because we can think about heavy capital equipment as being, at one end of the spectrum, and then just a pure service organization at the other. And there's all kinds of space in the middle. Consumables are somewhere in the middle of that. And then I think about a lot of software providers. They're getting closer and closer to service. So I think you do have to have your development system right sized for the kind of work you're doing. What I mean by that, Damon, is like, if I'm going to go invest $1 million in tooling, I better make sure that design's right, because coming back and making changes later is really expensive. So I'm going to, in my product development system, I'm going to put a lot of energy into design reviews and tests, ensuring that that design, by the time I get hard tool it, it's ready. Now, what if I'm doing something less? Well, in those cases, I'm going to be less demanding of the test of the product as I develop it, and I'm going to be much faster to get that product out to the market and evaluating it and understanding how it's working. So, if I think, like I said, consumables is something in the middle of that. So I think, as you're developing your phase gate system, what we want to do, there's no one phase gate system that works for every company. What we do is we'll develop a phase gate system that takes into account those requirements that make a difference in your business. And we won't, and our aspiration is not to add any requirements that are part of, that are not, because that's just an anchor. So that, that's in the phase gate system, Damon. That's one example of differences. I would say, if you don't mind me going, if you don't mind me going to another part of the example, though, if I think about how do I relate to my customers, and how about understanding, my customers' use cases, I think there's much less difference there.
Yeah, that's where my head was, is thinking about the user discovery workflow tool and understanding the jobs to be done in the customer and making a better customer experience that our service solves a problem for, that we monetize, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. So those places are. I don't think there's hardly any difference there at all. And so yeah, it really varies by the business that you're in.
Okay, another question here, George. What are the top issues that you've seen in your experience that you encounter when trying to transform the innovation function as a company? What's the usual suspects that you run into?
Yeah, so the usual, and I've seen this quite a few times. Not every time, but I would say 3/4 of the time, there's a frustrated management that is not getting what they want out of R&D. And their answer, and what they've sort of given up, and they just keep asking for more. They essentially just, they kind of take it to like
Crack the whip.
Yeah, it's like going to court. If you want 1 million, ask for 5. Well, when you go to your R&D group and you just, you beat them down every day, asking for more and more. On the other side, helping the other side of this collision is a group of R&D, a development team that just feels overwhelmed. When they make commitments, they don't really mean it. They've kind of habituated to not winning. And so for me, one of the first things I'm looking for is, guys, let's just right size the request. Let's give the team what they can do, get them, build that consensus between the management and the development teams. We can do this. And, so we ask the management team, hey, reduce your overall request, but we say to the development team, but they really mean it. You need to deliver. And we develop the mentality of a player on a field. There's the scoreboard. We're not winning. What do I got to do to help us win? Because I'm in. And so I think the first thing I look at is building that and just getting a steady flow through the development group and getting a few projects on time. And I'm telling you guys, you build up confidence with your management. Once you get that confidence, they kind of let back a little bit, stop with the whip cracking a little bit. The trust comes, the team feels more satisfied, they go home winners, and there's just a spiral of virtue that comes out of righting that wrong.
Yep. This is the last question, and it's suitable because we have about a minute left. So what has been your experience with redefining business models through innovation? And the Pampered Chef example would be one of those where you created a new service, which is digitization, which is monetized, went from 0 to, can't remember what the number was, 3 million or 5 million.
Yeah,
so based on your experience, what does that process look like around just innovating the model of business and the pools for revenue growth beyond products and the next pipeline of portfolio and that kind of thing?
Well, of course, it's very complex because people keep wanting to go back to their old model. So, I think the beginning of wisdom here is just, the playbook for lean thinking is the first thing we need is to draw out a model of where we want to get, what our expectations are for the business, and then being able to build a plan that we're able to measure so that we're able to keep the right focus on it. I think the second thing is, and I've seen this in a lot of places, it's the need to pull outside people in. Because if you've sold a product one way for your whole life, it's just so difficult to say, here's a new way, I'm just going to convert over. And so there has to be some kind of influence from people who have done it before. You may have one way to do it, that I've seen work a lot is maybe having some sort of a third-party agreement where people are doing some initial development as your team is developing that skill to do something new. Or you may even go further back from that, and the beginning of it, you might actually be reselling.
I think my experience here, if I could add in on this one, is you need to change the mindset of the company. And here's what I mean by that. Stop thinking of your offering as a list of discrete products and services from which the customer chooses from or that you lead with, and more of an integrated system of an offering that complements one another. So Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, or former CEO of Amazon, I guess, calls it the flywheel. So you might look at Amazon's businesses like Amazon Cloud and AWS, and of course Amazon the digital piece, and why they're in gathering your data. Like all of it works together in a way that there's a method behind the madness that we don't appreciate as consumers, but they're monetizing every aspect of it in ways that complement each other. So an example that's like launching a static product. Well, why wouldn't we launch a product that we could do remote service diagnostic for, that we could monetize and invent a new model of growth for, right? So kind of thinking broader and wider in a more holistic context, I think is the thinking that has to be brought into the organization to make that leap.
Well, and you make me think of, I want to say Dobson's 10 models of innovation. Yeah. Where you get outside of just thinking about the product. I mean, the product is only one of the 10. And so, yeah, I think that it's a great question, because you do want to get out of just thinking about the product, and that model is, that's something that is definitely something we teach in design thinking, to try to look out beyond just, how you've served the market in the past.
Okay, George. Great job. So we got through all the questions. So again, I'll remind everyone that the presentation will be emailed to you, a recording of the presentation will be emailed to you a day later. Please check your spam email folder if you did not receive it. And then of course, we encourage you to share this with other people in your network so that they can get the benefit that you had today. And if you have any questions or want to have more time with George to explore these areas more deeply, you can reach out to us here with the contact information, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, George, for your time. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, as always, from you, and we look forward to having you on the next webinar. Take care.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye now.
Appreciate y'all. Thanks.